Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Space Warfighter Talks. I'm your host, Bill Wolf, the president and founder of the Space Force Association. We are honored today to have with us Colonel John P.Y. Thien, who is currently assigned as Commander, Space Delta III, Headquarters, United States Space Force. He commands a newly activated Space Electronic Warfare Delta with personnel deployed worldwide. Space Delta III is responsible for preparing and presenting assigned and attached forces for the purpose of executing electronic attack, electronic protection, and electronic warfare support in, from, and through space. The units falling under his command within Space Delta III are the 4th, 5th, and 16th Space Control Squadron and the 721st Operations Support Squadron. Colonel Thien, thanks so much for being with us today, sir.
Thanks for having us, Bill.
Sir, before we get into too many questions, I always like to offer the opportunity to just provide a little bit of background in how you ended up as a commander of Space Delta III.
Well, I'll tell you, it's kind of a dream come true. I never thought I would be in the position I'm in, but I started out in missiles up in Montana, and then I was able to switch over to the space side, went to the weapons school, and then from there I was assigned to the 4th Space Control Squadron in Holloman. And that kind of set me on my path towards the career I'm on. It included stints at the weapons school teaching there, up at Building 1 as headquarters, Air Force Space Command when that existed, dealing with electronic warfare. Coming back around to being the DO at the 4th Space Control Squadron and commander at 25th Space Range. I kind of ended up here, again, I've been an electronic warfare guy my entire career. Never thought I'd be in the position I'm in, but I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. I was able to stand up the organization and hopefully setting the foundation to pass it off to future great leaders.
Yes, sir. Now, PY, tell us a little bit about the Space Electronic Warfare mission set. I mean, it's something we talk about, but can you provide a little bit of specificity to what that mission really entails?
Mm-hmm. So it's very similar to the aircraft side. So just like on the aircraft side, we have growlers, we have radar, things on aircraft that provide warning, that provide geolocations, those types of systems. And we're very similar in space, and we're going to even grow that even further. So right now we have the 4th Space Control Squadron, which we kind of traditionally say is our offensive unit. They operate the counter communication system, and it does exactly what it sounds like. It will go out and negate enemy communication system that's traveling through space. On the defensive side, we have the 16th Space Control Squadron, the Cobras, and they're sitting back surveilling the environment, and they're watching for interference on some of our own communication systems. And if there is interference, we find out who's doing it, characterize it, and determine what to do with it from that perspective. Both the 4th and 16th have 2 teams out, each doing worldwide operations as we speak. They've supported the warfighter as far back as 2005 that we've been continuously deployed. So we've had a presence. I know Space Force is still young, but even in the Air Force days, we've had a space presence downrange, doing great work. I also have the 5th Space Control Squadron, the Griffins, and they're working on some future mission type stuff that we can't really talk about in this forum. And then obviously, lastly, we have the 721 OSS, the Warriors, that support everything we do, from the training, from the deployment aspect, to the exercise planning, to standardization evaluation. They kind of do it all.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. You said warfighter. How does your organization define space warfighter?
We are, I will say one thing that we're proud of, we are the only Delta that actively deploys. While there's onesies, twosies, and other Deltas, we actually have to go downrange to do our mission. That's because of how the physics required to affect some of the enemy systems in space. So we take that to mean that, hey, we're ready to go. We're mentally, emotionally, physically ready to deploy at a moment's notice. That we're able to go down, provide effects, be away from our families for 6 months at a time, and then come home mission complete, if you will. And that's a generic way to think about it, but how we're trying to move towards in the future is, the intelligence-based operations that we haven't really had a decade ago, the threat-based operations. And so how do we go forth knowing what our enemy is and how we're going to defeat that enemy downrange is really how we define being a warfighter. Being able to wring out everything in the system, and then if we do come to blows, that we go down swinging. that we're ready to take it to the max and execute on behalf of the commander.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about the mission sets, either real world or an exercise that you look at to ensure that critical communication is protected and that your mission set of offensive space control is actually being executed against? Can you provide just some vignettes that allow folks to help cage their thought process around your mission set?
Sure. It's also, we're undergoing a pretty big change, not only in Delta 3, but across Space Force. And really the military is, we've been primarily focused on what you would refer to as a global war on terrorism in the last 20 years. And so that's really what our deployments are focused on, is still trying to, if you will say, clean up some of those pockets of issues around the world. And so that's where you can guess as we're deployed. But we're trying to move now towards finishing those up, but also being ready for a near peer fight. And so with the great power competition that's coming down, we have to be ready to provide some sort of effect for the commander for those. And so that's really what we're trying to posture ourselves towards, is moving from being able to isolate or engage small pockets of extremist organizations to large countries now, which are very well developed in their communication structure. And with that, there's a lot of things that they have that utilize space assets in order to accomplish their missions. And so we want to make sure that for the enemy side, that we have the ability to go out and engage them and do what we need to do to gain and maintain space superiority. At the same time, for the U.S. side, in order for us to force project, we need our space assets in order to do over the horizon type operations. And so protecting those critical links is what we do on the defensive side.
Yeah, we use the term space superiority quite a bit, and I know there's quite a bit of discussion between space superiority, space dominance. So when you say space superiority, are you referring to constant space superiority, or basically short space superiority and duration based on mission requirements? Can you get into a little more detail on that?
I think it's exactly what you said there at the end. It's definitely what is the requirement. And so we've talked about military-wide about how do we go into that area denial defense and provide an effect, whether it's a bomb on target, whatever it is, and then get out. And so for us, it's definitely going to be, what does the mission require? Would we like space supremacy? Of course we would, but to actually achieve that is near impossible. And so how do we achieve superiority, the level of superiority required at a given time and place to provide an effect to the warfighter, whoever he or she is, in whatever domain he or she is?
Yeah, you bring up a point about having the resources. Do we have the resources necessary? And I know there's a lot of discussion on a regular basis that talk about the domain and how the domain presents and provides capability to ensure domain superiority. Do you have the resources necessary to accomplish the space superiority mission you're being asked to do or are going to be asked to do?
So we do. In order to provide the effects we're being asked to right now, I believe we do. Now, as we move to the future, I think those requirements are going to morph as to what are we being asked to do, how are we being asked to do it, what is the geographical area that we're being asked to do it. Russia, for example, is a really, really big country, and I probably don't have all the resources to cover that entire country. But depending on what you want me to do, I will provide an appropriate effect to allow you to do your mission. And so would I want more? Of course I want more. Do I want better? Of course I want better. But I'm able to do, I think, the mission that we're being asked to do right now. We have the appropriate amount of resources. As we morph in the future, and as our mission area morphs into more force packaging, more combining with other deltas to have greater effects, I think that we will ask for maybe some different capabilities across the board.
Oh, that's great. And that brings up a really good point about evolving the mission set to support your operational needs of the geographic combatant command and the functional combatant command of U.S. Space Comm. So that being said, you talked about force packaging. Anytime anybody starts talking about force packaging, I think it's a good opportunity to talk about, one, the differences between Space Force and U.S. Spacecom, just one, and then two, what does force packaging look like in terms of training versus execution, and how important is it to accomplish the force packaging in training to ensure that you can accomplish your job during execution?
So a lot of questions there. So make sure I cover all. So Space Force and Spacecom. We'll start there. Space Force is a service just like Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and we organize, train, equip, or generate, present, and sustain forces to give to combatant commanders to execute. So when I go downrange, I will wear a Space Force uniform, just like my Air Force brethren wear Air Force, Navy's wear their uniform. They are service assets that go forward. Space Command is on the combatant command side, and those are the folks that actually go out and employ the joint forces. Just like in the best example I can have is in CENTCOM. That Central Command is a combatant commander, and he has Air Force planes, Army planes, Navy planes, Marine planes are flying at once, and they're all service toys that the service has created, but he's putting them together in a joint fight to go forward and do what they do. And so that's kind of the best way I can explain the difference between Space Force and Space Command. That General Dickinson, being the Space Command commander, will go and put space assets from the multiple services in to the joint fight in order to accomplish space effects. Whereas General Raymond is the CSO for the Space Force, will generate requirements, train forces, and prepare them to get ready to be executed by General Dickinson. In terms of force packaging, so how do we go forth and do what we can do? So we've had some, we've been working with the other deltas and how do we achieve greater effects than where we are. A lot of times we're very stovepiped in what we think, and I have my electronic warfare assets, and that's all I'm going to worry about. That's all I'm going to execute. Whereas I think in the future where we're going to go is we're going to have to be force packaged. And so similar to on the air side, I'm an Air Force guy, I guess, by naturally, so I have a lot of Air Force examples. But we don't just send in an F-16 to go bomb a target by itself. We send in air superiority assets. We send in electronic warfare assets. Obviously, we have to have tankers. We have PAVA assets, all supporting that one individual to put a bomb on a target. And so I think that's the way we need to start thinking of space is, okay, we have whatever that mission is today. We need, that person goes forward and the other deltas now sit back and how can I best support that mission? Whether it's an orbital engagement, whether it's electronic warfare mission, whether it's monitoring the enemy, we all have very distinct capabilities within our deltas. And I think that if we would use those to achieve a greater effect, I think that's where we're moving in the future.
Yeah, force packaging is going to be critically important, as you mentioned. Major Harris has been working with 13th ASOS on presenting new space curriculum to some of the courseware they're executing now. We've got a great interview we did with them a few months ago. Can you talk about what you're doing today in support of that type of cross-domain or multi-domain integration efforts?
So exactly, and kind of when we talk about the force packaging, it's kind of space for space's sake, if you will. But now we also have to think about how do we achieve outside the domain, because really that's where we're really trying to get to in the art of warfighting for the military. So I know Major Harris has been working with the ASOS. We've been combining with other items. So recently we've been involved with some special operations exercises, and what is the best way to present space forces to something like a functional command like SOCOM. How do we provide forces? How can we get our timelines shrunk down enough that we can go out the door if needed and provide those quick effects to support a short duration soft mission, if you will. Think of whatever soft mission does. You can think of a bin Laden raid, for example. How do we go out the door when that balloon goes up to say, we know where that guy is? Hey, we're going down range to go get him. What can you do? We don't want to be standing on the sideline saying, well, it takes us 6 months to go out the door. Well, we don't really have anybody ready right now. No, we didn't think we had to do that. So we're not ready to do that. So we're trying to lean forward ahead. and say, particularly in this case with the soft community, about what is it you guys value? What would you like us to be able to do? And then how can we meet your demand? Have small, flexible, and very effective machinery, if you will.
And sir, is that something that looking out across the various domains and requesting basically feedback from them on the critical capabilities they need from space, is that something you're doing, or is that something that basically is the Space Force is leaning forward to ensure that, hey, here are the capabilities we have, what additional capabilities do you need, and do we have the capabilities you need to actually accomplish your mission? Is that, I don't suspect it sits with you. I suspect that basically, to your point, goes across all the deltas, and the Space Force is really holistically looking at that from the other services.
So exactly. So it does not sit with me. Although with the latest reorganization, I can be kind of an injector of those requirements. Whereas a few years ago, that was not necessarily my place, and I wasn't in my current position. I wasn't really supposed to. I could give input, but it wasn't really as well received. Is probably the wrong term, but valued. So now, but in the current construct, as a mission owner, if I go to these exercises, I can come back and be like, hey, here's my lessons learned. Here's what we needed. We needed this type of effect at this time in this manner, and that's not, my systems aren't designed to do that. And so with the 1067 process and those types of hooks that I now have in the system, I'm able to a little bit more easily be able to put those types of requirements in the system. We do have a SWAC that's doing force design. We have the Space Operations Command that's doing a lot of the execution of that force design then. And so I have, with the flat organization, I have a much easier way to actually input those types of requests, if you will, into the system.
Yeah, that's extremely important, obviously. Talking about capability development, how important is it to utilize the testing, tactics, training process as new capabilities develop? The way I talk about this a lot is you've got developmental tests and operational tests. Obviously, new capabilities are being developed during developmental testing, and then the tactics are created through operational tests and evaluation, and then those tactics are used during training, and during training you then take best practices and improve your tactics, which also could lead into more acquisition capability discussion. How important is that process to your organization?
So it's really critical to have an excellent test community like we have, to be able to come in and say, what do we have? What are we testing? Are we testing the end-to-end system rather than just the individual system we get delivered? And so all of the things that the testing community has been doing over the last several years, I think, is important because every one of those, like you said, feeds in the acquisition system. Last week I was at Space Flag, for example, and we got all the disciplines represented there, and we were able to try to attack some really hard problems. Some of them are, seem a little bit impossible, some wicked problems, if you will. And how do we get after that? And so, just like you said, is we got electronic warfare and battle managers and orbital warfare experts all coming together to say, how do we achieve this? And then, just like you said, it's okay. What do we have, and what do we need to have in order to accomplish to win this fight? And so we can take that back into our systems, and then having the testers that come right on in order to say it works, it doesn't work. And so we've had some great success with the testing community. And so having the ability to do that, and like coming back to what you're saying, what does it mean to be a warfighter? How do I improve my system? How do I think beyond what it can do to create new tactics, techniques, and procedures to help defeat the enemy? And so that whole process is invaluable for us being able to win the next war.
Now, you brought up the magic word of Space Flag. I don't typically ask questions about Space Flag, but since you brought it up, would you mind just providing a quick overview of what Space Flag was? And back to the point, are some of the best practices that you observed during Space Flag going to be presented back to the TTP developers so you can increase and further evolve those TTPs?
So Space Flag, this last go is actually at St. Louis at the Boeing facility in St. Louis. But Space Flag is roughly mirroring Red Flag in that we are taking all the disciplines from across the Space Force, putting them together and giving some real world problems about how do we go and how do we achieve the objectives of what we need to do. So it's mainly focused on the lieutenant, captain, specialist, staff sergeant level, if you will, in order to get those guys and gals in the right mindset. People like me, I'm kind of past my time, but to get them focused on where do we need to be, how to think tactically, how to think beyond what they've been taught to achieve greater effects. That's really what that is meant for. We have several iterations of several goes at it, if you will, to attack different tactical problems, and they modify slightly. And it's really neat to see the learning from day one all the way to the last day. Whereas day one they come in and they're still a little confused and a little tentative where it is. Whereas the last day, they're raring to go and ready to advocate for their plan for where they need to go forward, and thinking holistically, not just for their own little system, but thinking how does my little portion contribute to a larger fight. And so that's Space Flag in a nutshell. Yeah, and so that's our premier exercise. Now, is it perfect? Of course not. It never is. And so we're evolving it, and STARCOM is really looking forward about where do we take this? What does it look like in the future? Obviously, we have limitations where red flag, you can actually bring planes in and actually fly against threats on range. Our support structure isn't that robust. We don't have extra assets to go fly in space, and the space range is still growing to meet the demand of what it needs to be. And so as we move forward there, what does Space Flag look like 10 years from now to here? It's going to look a whole lot more robust because of the great people that are working on it. But as it stands right now, it's great to get everyone together to start talking about that force packaging to get that warfighter mindset on what they're doing.
Thank you. I tell you, one of the reasons why Red Flag was created was to ensure that the service members were checked out before they deployed downrange, which we can't help now but talk about. Back in the day, we talked about Space Mission Force. I'm not sure if Space Mission Force is still there, but it was a way to present those forces. And Space Flag be used as basically a checkout for those trained forces to present to combatant commanders? Is that kind of an opportunity, or are we just not quite there yet? Can you talk a little bit about force presentation and whether or not Space Flag can support checkout of those combat ready forces?
I think it could in the aspect of you have your weapon system, and now you got to think beyond your weapon system and how do you employ with others. Obviously all of our ops floors are dispersed across the world, really, in terms of where we fly, SIBRs and GPS and MilSatcom, etc. And so how do we, we're no longer in a room that can plan this. So how do we distributely be able to execute our mission? So it does have some potential there. Right now, Space Mission Force it is still a thing. We do have people in different deploy to dwell ratios and vol periods. And so in order to link that up to be able to check out everybody, I think is still a bridge too far for us right now. In the future, I think that would be great. That's your kind of your final checkout before you go into your deployability window, if you will. I think it'd be great. I think there's some challenges in order to get to there, though.
I understand, Colonel Thien. Thank you. Now, I love having these live events because it allows the audience to get engaged. And I know there's plenty of folks out there that I'm sure have lots of questions. So one question I'm getting from the audience, it gets into the AETF cycle that we're talking about. What is Space Delta III doing related to force presentation, similar to what DoD and CSAF are moving forward with on the new DFE and new AETF force generation model to ensure a predictable, sustainable, and cyclical force to get at high-end readiness?
So I will say our assets are labeled as low density, high demand. But what we've been doing, and it seems to work pretty good, is we're on a 1 to 2 dwell. And so we have, the forces that you go out for a 6-month period is the length of our deployments. So go out for 6 months, then you come back for 6 months and you reconstitute. And then next 6 months, you spin up, getting ready to go out again. And so I guess it's an 18-month timeline in which you'll be deployed 6 months out of that time. That seems to work pretty well for us. That seems to be about the sweet spot for having folks go out and folks returning. That's really what we're manned to as it currently sits. And so that's where we are in terms of task force generation.
And from a reserve perspective, I know you had reserve units supporting your mission set. I'm sure those reserve units are still supporting. Is that correct?
So absolutely, and it's only growing. So in addition to the units that I have, units that are in the same mission area. So we have the 380th Space Control Squadron, the Crows over that sit next to the 16th Space Control Squadron, and it's a great partnership. Literally, the commander's offices are in the same front office. Everyone works together. Every rotation we have reserve members on our rotation, and so it's been a great partnership with them. There is a move to add a couple of folks, start generating potentially a reserve squadron for the 4th, but that's in its infant. It's still pre-decisional, so I don't want to throw anyone out right now. But they're taking some looks at how do we best employ a reserve squadron to the 4th, and so that's something that maybe 5 years from now I could go back here and say, we have an active squadron. So.
Right, understand. And I just bring that up because people think that this reserve guard discussion is a new one, but this has been, the reserve and guard have been in the space mission set for a long time doing some phenomenal work. And we're just continuing probably that opportunity. Now, the organizational challenges and discussions are ongoing, as you say. So we'll stand by and wait for the outcome of those ongoing discussions. I've got a question here from, yeah, go ahead, sir.
No, I'll just throw out there. I know you asked something about the reserves, but in terms of the guard, I'll tell you that they're more on the offensive side. There's 3 current offensive guard squadrons, and I'll just throw out that the 138th Colorado International Guard Space Control Squadron is currently deployed doing one of our mission sets right now. So they've been a great partner also.
Great. No, that's good to hear. And again, to our audience members, just know that the ARC has been involved in the space mission set for quite some time. What are you finding as the biggest issues you're dealing with to get to end of job? Financial, human resources, availability, information access, real time, situational awareness. What are the things that are keeping you up at night, sir?
I would say probably the things that are keeping me up at night are probably the resources. We are a very lean service, and that's appropriately so. I believe that it's just over 5,000 people currently in the Space Force. The next smallest is the Marines at 170,000. And so, as we set up the Space Force, obviously there's been challenges of how do we make our mark? How do we do what we need to do? Keep doing what we need to do, but also create our own culture. And so some of that's been, across the board has been, how do we put people in the right spot to do their mission? So some of those resources, as we've cut out different organizations, being able to balance those resources across all the organizations, I think has been a challenge. And everybody is doing the best they can with what they have, as you would imagine. But there's still some challenges, as there would be even if we weren't the Space Force. When we were the Air Force, there were still challenges of getting resources. And so some of those, I think, are probably just the more difficult things to make sure that I can get exactly what I need in order to employ the forces that I need to.
Sir, thank you for answering that one. Here's one. Do you have the resources necessary to conduct the testing that needs to be done? I know the Space Test and Training Range is a limited resource. Can you talk a little bit about the Space Test and Training Range and whether or not that is providing you the necessary resources to accomplish your mission set?
So happy to. So the 25th Space Range, and they have a reserve component, the 379th Space Range. It provides electronic warfare range to customers around the world. And so for us, for example, we do a monthly exercise that we integrate with 16th Air Force with electronic warfare, and they provide a range for us to participate in. That range has a variety of targets, of signals for us to navigate through and to do what it is we do. And so they of course are a limited resource also that the Navy, the Army, the other services are also looking for that. There's only one space range. It's owned by now Space Force, and so it's good for us, but it is obviously a limited resource. And so they're key though in that if we have a new threat show up, we have something else happening out there, that we request the space range to put that on the range. Very similar to the Nellis range in that if there's a new F-35s need to fly get something, they work with the NTTR in order to put that widget or that system out on the range in order to replicate that. And so that's where the space range is moving towards, is being able to replicate threats in the space domain for us to exercise, train against.
Oh, that's good to hear. And I suspect that as more capability becomes quantified, that limited resource is just going to, the requirement for that limited resource is just going to expand as well. So I tell you, there's a lot of, I think, industry is looking at this, wondering how do they get involved? If industry, I mean, how do you look at that? Industry in the private sector has been doing what you've been doing for quite some time, I suspect. You know, they look at problem sets in a CDO environment just from critical links, and they do similar activities. How would industry help get involved in what you're doing? What's the process by which they can speak with you and speak about your mission set?
So obviously they can reach out to me directly. I'm happy to chat with anybody, giving it as my schedule allows, but I'm happy to chat with everybody and just say, here's where we are and here's potentially what we're looking for. I would say one of the bigger things is as like you said, as we grow the community, I think there's going to be more and more look to industry to say, hey, we have this tough problem and we need some sort of a widget in order to accomplish it. And so I think that's probably the biggest way for industry to get involved. You know, I don't think what we do is too cosmic. It is it's just like air electronic warfare, in that we're putting trons on a signal to either deny it, degrade it, deceive it, disrupt it, you know, any of the Ds. And so taking a look at what the enemy has and what we have, and so exploiting the enemy for what they have and protecting our own. I think you can come to some pretty quick conclusions as to what we need to do and where we need to do it.
And sir, what's next? What's the next exercise? What's the next big event that you're planning for? I know there's always a pretty arduous schedule that you probably have to abide by. Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious, what are you looking at downrange?
Well, the next big exercise, and it's still it's a little bit in flux in terms of we're trying to get back to resources. Is we're trying to ascertain some airlift and some money, but we're trying to partner with the Australians and Talisman Sabre coming up later in the year. And so working again, how are we expanding with the coalition? We have some emerging coalition partners that are looking to get involved in the mission area. And so pretty soon it won't be just a U.S. problem. It will actually be a coalition going forth. Just like, again, I keep going back to the air, but just like Red Flag, we'd have multiple countries coming in Red Flag. I see a coalition coming into doing not just Space Flag, but EW stuff on some of our exercises. And so we have some really great partners we're trying to work with, but that would be the next big one. And that's a big lift. It takes our folks several months of planning and then actually loading a plane, getting it overseas, unpacking it, actually doing the exercise, and then coming home. It's almost a mini deployment in and of itself. But that's the next big thing that we're looking at on the horizon. Then we have a few things after that.
Yeah, I suspect Australia in the middle of summertime in Colorado isn't going to be as nice, but I'm sure it'll be exciting all the same. Let's talk a little bit about certification. What's required for an operator to become certified on the quote-unquote weapon system?
So we'll take, I'll just take you through if we get a brand new person in the Space Force. And so a brand new air specialist or a lieutenant, they'll start out at Vandenberg and get their space fundamentals. And then after that, they get tracked. And so right now, Space Electronic Warfare is its own track within Space Force. And so typically, we've always been just, hey, you're a space person, you know everything about space. We're trying to break that up a little bit. If you almost think of it like a bomber track, a recce track, a fighter track, we're trying to do the same type of thing on Space Force. And so for us, electronic warfare will be its own track. And so after we get done with our space fundamentals, then we will go into warfighter follow-on at the 319 Combat Training Squadron there at Peterson, and they will take those individuals and teach them to be electronic warfare professionals. So platform agnostic, talking very geeky things like frequency polarizations, orientations, all those types of fun things that everyone likes to talk about. We take them from there and we make them electronic warfare professionals. And then they go off to their first assignment. And there's more electronic warfare people than just in Delta 3. Each of the other Deltas, a GPS has an electronic warfare member on its crew, for example, but multiple of the other systems have electronic warfare personnel sitting on them. So it's not just here in Delta 3. But for a member that comes to Delta 3, then we take them in and then we train them on their weapon system or whatever that is, whether it's Bounty Hunter, the 16th, or CCS over at the 4th. And so kind of that track is the first, if you attribute it to like the pilot model, the first set of classes teach you to fly the Cessna. And then from there, if you go fighter track, the next one teaches you the T-37, T-38. And then finally, we get to your unit, they actually teach you to fly the F-22, F-35. That's kind of the same model we're trying to do in order to keep people, one, get them in the space family. Next classes, get them in the EW family, and then finally put them on their weapon system.
Oh, that's a good overview. I think there's been a lot of questions about how the space professional, the space warfighter, the Guardians are developed. So thank you for providing that overview. It is all based on the threat, as you said at the beginning of this. And so how does one look at the emerging threat, and how quickly can you get informed on emerging threats? What is the process by which you get the intelligence necessary to continue to execute your mission?
So we now have our own Delta, dedicated ISR, so Delta 7, led by Colonel Chandler Atwood. And so how he has organized his folks is I have a whole debt of intel personnel that literally sit with me that provide electronic warfare intelligence. And so that is kind of my touch point to dig into the intel community, whether I need them something, whatever it is. I go through Lieutenant Colonel Ray Wilcox, and he's the one that can then go and find whatever it is that I need. But I get regularly updates from them of here's where we're at. And then, like I said, we're still trying to catch up with having threat-based operations. And so, one, they're putting into all our continuation training and our advanced training, real-world intelligence in order to train us against that. But he's also keeping an eye out for what is coming down the pipe, what is the enemy doing, and then potentially how can we get some of our planners in there? How do we go actually exploit that? And so they take different problem sets such as that and figure out how to attack it.
Got it. Now, you talked about the career progression. How important and how early can folks get educated on the mission planning process? I mean, talk a little bit about the mission planning, execution, and debrief process, and how early do folks start to learn about that process? So
I hope they're learning it from the very beginning. So that's my intent. So I think that once they come into the units, I think they get a little bit of it. They touch on it in the early parts of their training, their curricula. But as they come in, that's when our weapons officers really grab a hold of all these folks, and they try to incorporate and instill the mission planning process. So, like I mentioned, we have our monthly exercise with 16th Air Force. We have step rates. I mean, our folks come in several hours early. They plan what they think they're going to do. Intel gives them their we have the blue intel that says here's what we expect to have happen, here's what we want to go accomplish. We get some red inputs about, hey, here's what the red is going to do, and then we go forth and plan. We come back and debrief at the end. And so we hit that pretty hard right when they first come in, because it's to instill that mindset for how do we go forth and do what we need to do. And so it also kind of makes sure to instill in them the importance of intelligence in their actions. You're not just turn on the antenna just to turn on. You actually have a reason as to why you're turning it on, and what is the why behind that. And if you give them the why behind it, then you can get into mission type orders and let commanders be commanders. Say, this is exactly the effect I need you to have at this time, and let the commanders go and figure out the best way to do that. And the only way they're going to do that, like you said, is to do their appropriate mission planning, to know what the threat is, know what they're going against, know what their time frames are, et cetera.
Yeah, thank you, Colonel Thien. I tell you, this would be a last question. I know you got a hard stop here in just a few minutes, but we've got a question here that asks specifically, how does space electronic warfare operations relate compared to cyber warfare operations? Are they more similar or different?
So I would say yes to both of those questions. So there's a lot of similarities with cyber, because at the end of the day, I'm turning on my antenna, and what that's doing is sending electrons over to something else to be interpreted, which is very similar to a cyber mission set. It's very functional. You can do it from a lot of different locations. You can't see it. It's a lot of virtuality, if you will. So in that aspect, there's a lot of things that we can do. Now, once you get into exactly how you execute it, obviously we're obviously very different in cyber, and what they need to do with their cyber reconnaissance missions, the cyber attack missions are very different than how I would execute on the electronic warfare side. But at the end of the day, you're dealing with electromagnetic fields and trying to manipulate those, which takes some really which takes people a lot smarter than me in order to do. So
Really, it's all about electromagnetic superiority. You know, when we start talking about multi-domain, we really have to talk, what does the electromagnetic spectrum look like, and how do we ensure superiority of that domain? Colonel Thien, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'll end it on that. So you kind of bring that up, and we like to say electromagnetic superiority is going to be key to the next fight. I mean, that's going to be a requirement to win the next war. So whether it's done by cyber, by us, or by somebody else, somebody needs to do that, because that is how we do all of our operations. On our side is whether it's over the horizon, whatever the case may be. Everything in space requires the electromagnetic spectrum. And so if you don't have a way to be able to control that and make sure to have the superiority enough in order to still control your satellites and have an awareness of what's going on around you, we're not going to be successful in the next war.
Colonel Thien, thanks so much for being a member of the Space Force Association. I really do appreciate it. And thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule today to talk with us about everything going on in Space Delta 3. Sir, any closing comments?
No, I appreciate the time here. It's always great to talk to the SFA. I'm excited what you guys are doing. So thanks for the time, and thanks for allowing me to get my message out.
All right, Colonel. Thanks so much. Have a great Space Force day. Semper Supra.
Semper Supra.
Out here.